In this video, I'll guide you through the process of connecting your HTML forms to a MySQL database using PHP. Recently, I've received numerous questions and comments requesting a detailed tutorial on form backends, and today, I'm excited to address those requests. We'll walk through each step involved in setting up the backend with PHP and MySQL. I'll explain everything in detail to ensure you have a clear understanding. First, we'll create a form using HTML and CSS. When we fill in the fields for the first name, username, and password, and then submit the form, you'll see a message confirming you have successfully registered. All the entered data will then be stored in the MySQL database. Let's get started. First, we'll start by installing XAMPP. Installing XAMPP will automatically set up PHP along with Apache, MySQL, and other essential components. XAMPP is a comprehensive package that provides everything needed to create a local server environment for web development. If you already have XAMPP installed, you can skip ahead using the timestamps. If not, visit apachefriends.org and click on Download. Since I'm using Windows, I'll download the Windows installer. I'll choose the first option. Once the download is complete, go ahead and run the installer. The installer is straightforward. Just remember, you can choose a different installation folder if you don't want it installed on the C drive. I'm fine with installing it on the C drive, so I'll proceed. Give it some time to unpack the files and create the uninstaller. Once it's done, click Finish to open the XAMPP control panel. I'll go ahead and start both Apache and MySQL. Under MySQL, click Admin to open phpMyAdmin, where we'll create the database, tables, and everything needed for the backend. Next, we'll start creating our form. As usual, we'll need some icons from remisicon.com and a font from Google Fonts. For the project folder, place it in the same installation path as XAMPP. For me, that's the C drive. I'll open it and locate the XAMPP folder. Inside, find and open the htdocs folder. Since we'll be viewing or hosting the form locally, we'll create our project folder here. As always, we'll open the folder in VS Code. We'll create 3 files: an HTML file, a CSS file for styling, and a PHP file to connect the form to the MySQL database, which we'll call connect.php. Start by creating a basic HTML file and linking the CSS file. For now, we'll view this form in the browser using the live server extension. Next, head over to remixicon.com. Click here to open the Remix Icon repository on GitHub. Scroll down and copy the CDN link, then paste it back into the head section of your HTML file. Next, let's get a font from font.google.com. I will paste the link in the CSS file. Let us also add a basic reset to ensure consistency across browsers. We'll remove default margins and the padding. Set the box sizing to border box. This changes the box model so that the width and height properties include padding and border, but not margin. And set the default font for the entire document to Sign. If Sign isn't available, it will fall back to a generic sans serif font. Next, let's style the body of our HTML document to center our form both vertically and horizontally. By setting Display to Flex, we enable Flexbox, which is a powerful layout mode that allows us to align items easily. Using Justify Content to Center, we center the content horizontally within the body, ensuring the form is placed in the middle from left to right. The Align Items to Center property centers the content vertically, ensuring the form is placed in the middle from top to bottom. By setting minimum height to 100 VH, we ensure that the body takes up the full height of the viewport, which helps in centering the form vertically, regardless of the content size. Let's add a background image. As always, I've provided the image in the description, so go ahead and download it. Once you have the image, navigate to your project folder and paste it inside. We'll use a URL to reference the image we just added and set it to no repeat. By setting background size to cover, we make sure the image covers the entire background area, even if it needs to scale up or down. The background position property centers the image, ensuring the most important part of the image remains visible. Now let's create our HTML form. Wrap the form in a div with the class container. This container will help us apply consistent styling and layout adjustments to the form. We'll start by defining the form element with an action pointing to connect PHP and using the post method to securely send our data. Next, we'll add a heading for the form with an H1 tag that says register. Now let's create our first input field for the user's first name. We'll wrap this input in a div with the class form input. Inside this div, we'll add an input element of type text. We'll set a placeholder attribute to show first name. Make it a required field and give it a name attribute of first name so we can reference it in our PHP code. Next, we need to add icons inside the input fields. Start by going to remixicon.com and searching for a user icon. I've selected one I like, so I'll copy it and paste it directly below the first input field. Since we need 3 input fields in total, I'll duplicate this input field twice. For the second input field, I'll change the placeholder to username and update the name attribute to username. For the third input field, I'll change the type to password, the placeholder to password, and the name attribute to password. The icons and titles might not be visible yet, but we'll address that with CSS. For now, I'll set the color of the container to white. Lastly, for the password field, we need a different icon. I'll search for a lock icon, copy the one I like, and paste it below the final input field. Now let's style our container to make our form look visually appealing. We'll start by setting the container's width to 420 pixels, giving it a consistent size and ensuring it doesn't stretch too wide. We want the background to be transparent, so it allows any background images or colors behind it to show through, creating a sleek overlay effect. For the border of our container, we're using a 2px solid style. This means the border will be 2 pixels thick and have a solid line. The color of the border is defined using RGBA, which stands for red, green, blue, and alpha. The first 3 values, 255, 255, 255, represent the color white. In the RGB color model, 255 is the maximum value for each color channel, and when all 3 are at their maximum, they produce white. The fourth value of 0.2 means the border is only 20% opaque, making it very subtle and allowing some of the background to show through. This gives our container a refined and elegant look. Inside the container, we'll add padding, 30 pixels on the top and bottom, and 40 pixels on the sides. This padding ensures there's enough space around the form elements, preventing them from being too close to the container's edges. We'll also round the corners of the container with a 12-pixel border radius. This rounding gives it a modern, smooth appearance. Finally, we'll apply a backdrop filter with a 9-pixel blur. This effect blurs the area behind the container, helping the form stand out more distinctly and adding a touch of sophistication to the overall design. Together, these styles create a visually appealing, sleek, and modern form container that stands out nicely against the background. To make our form's heading stand out, we'll style the H1 element with the following CSS. First, we're setting the font size to 39 pixels. Next, the font weight is set to 600 to make the text bold but not overly heavy. The text align center property centers the text within the heading. Lastly, a padding bottom of 25 pixels adds space below the heading. By applying these styles, we create a heading that is not only visually striking, but also well-positioned and aesthetically pleasing, enhancing the user experience. Next, let's style the form input class. Firstly, we set the position to relative to allow us position child elements, like the icons, relative to this div. Next, we set width 100% to make sure our div takes up the full width of its parent container, ensuring that our input fields will span the entire width available. We then set the height to 50 pixels. Finally, a margin of 20 pixels on the top and bottom adds a vertical space around each form input div. This ensures that our input fields are well-structured, evenly spaced, and aligned. Now let's style the input fields within our form. We start by setting their width and height to 100%, ensuring they fill the entire space of their parent form input div. Next, we clear the default white background by setting background to transparent. To remove the default browser outline that appears when the input fields are focused, we use outline none. We apply the same border style used for the main container to maintain consistency. The text color inside the input fields is set to white to stand out against the dark background. We also add padding inside the input fields, 20 pixels on the top, bottom, and left, with an extra 45 pixels on the right. This extra padding on the right provides space for the icons without overlapping the text. Finally, we round the corners of the input fields by setting the border radius to 4 pixels, giving them a smoother, more modern look. Next, let's style the placeholder text inside our input fields. We use the placeholder pseudo element to target the text specifically, then set the text color to white to ensure it's easily readable. Now let's style the icons within the input fields. First, we set the color to a green hue. Then set the position to absolute to position the icons precisely within the input fields. Position the icons 16 pixels from the top and 10 pixels from the right edge. Finally, add a transform, translate -50% to shift the icons horizontally by 50% of their own width. Together, these styles ensure the icons are clearly visible, properly aligned, and aesthetically pleasing within the form fields. Lastly, in our HTML, let's create the Submit button for our form. Here's how you can add it. We use the button element with the class btn. Text displayed on the button will be Sign Up. We will set the type to Submit to ensure it submits the form when clicked. Now let's move on to styling the button. First, we set the button's width to 100% to make sure it spans the entire width of its container. We add a height of 45 pixels, which gives the button a substantial clickable area. We choose a vibrant green color for the background to make the button stand out. Please note, don't include this white color. It's irrelevant. By removing the border and outline, we achieve a clean, minimalist look. The border radius of 4 pixels gives the button slightly rounded corners. The cursor changes to a pointer when hovering over the button, indicating that it is clickable. We set the font size to 16 pixels for easier readability. Then set the text color to this dark color. Apply a font weight of 550 to make the text slightly bold. Finally, we add a transition effect property, which should apply to all properties that change, at a duration of 0.4 seconds, with an ease in out timing function. Now let's add some interactivity to our button for when it's hovered over. We'll change the button's background color to a darker shade of gray and adjust the text color to white for better contrast and readability against the darker background. Perfect. We've finished the design. As I mentioned earlier, we'll be using the post method to securely send the data submitted in the registration form. So let's move on to our connect init.php file and start connecting the form to the MySQL database. We need to securely retrieve and sanitize the user input from our registration form. In this line of code, we're using the filter input function to get the value of the first name field from the post request. The filter sanitize string filter is applied to remove any tags and encode special characters. This step is crucial as it protects against basic XSS attacks and ensures the input is safe to use. By sanitizing the input, we make sure that our application handles user data securely, reducing the risk of malicious code being executed. We will also get the values of the username and password fields from the post request. Now let's set up the variables needed to connect to our MySQL database. First, we define the host. Next, we set the database username. Then we define the database password. Finally, we specify the name of the database. This tells our script which database to connect to. In our example, we're connecting to a database named YouTube. With these variables set, we're now ready to establish a connection to our MySQL database using PHP. Now let's move to PHP and MyAdmin to set up our database and table. First, open PHP MyAdmin and click on New to create a new database. Enter the name YouTube as specified in our variables and click Create. Next, we need to create a table within this database. I'm naming the table Account, and it will have 4 columns. Click on Create Table. The first column will be ID, which we will set to auto increment. This column will serve as the primary key, so make sure to designate it as such. The remaining 3 columns will be first name, username, and password. For each of these columns, set the data type to a variable length character string. Be sure to specify the length for each field according to your requirements. Once you've configured these settings, click Save to finalize the table creation. Your table is now ready to store user information. With our database and table setup, it's time to establish a connection between our PHP script and the MySQL database. So we initialize a new MySQLi object, allowing us to connect to our MySQL database using the parameters we've defined earlier. The first parameter, host, specifies the server where the database is hosted. In our case, it's localhost, since we are running it locally. The second parameter, DB username, is the username we set, which is root. The third parameter, DB password, is the password for the database. We've left it empty for our local environment. The fourth parameter, DB name, is the name of the database we want to connect to, which is YouTube. We now have a connection to our MySQL database and can proceed to interact with it through our PHP script. Next, we need to handle potential connection errors and prepare our SQL statement for inserting data into the database. Let's start with checking if our connection to the database was successful. We check if there was a connection error. If an error is found, the script will terminate and display the error message, including the error number and error description. If the connection is successful, we'll prepare our SQL statement for inserting data into the account table. Here we use the prepare method of the MySQLi object to create a prepared statement. This helps prevent SQL injection by separating the SQL code from the data. However, it's important to check if the preparation was successful. If the preparation fails, the script will terminate and display an error message. Now let's bind the parameters to our prepared statement. This step is crucial for ensuring the data we insert into the database is secure and properly formatted. We use the bindParam method of our prepared statement object. The first argument, SSS, specifies the types of the parameters we are binding. Each S stands for a string, indicating that first name, username, and password are all strings. The next 3 arguments are the variables. These variables hold the data we want to insert into the database. By binding these parameters, we ensure that the data is safely and securely passed to our SQL statement. Now let's execute the prepared statement and handle the result. We use the execute method to run the prepared statement. If the execution is successful, we display a success message to the user. You have successfully registered. If there's an error during execution, we catch it and display an error message along with the specific error details. This ensures that users receive immediate feedback about their registration attempt, whether it was successful or if there was an issue. Finally, let's close our prepared statement and the database connection to ensure resources are properly released. By closing both the statement and the connection, we maintain efficient resource management and keep our application running smoothly. Now let's test our form to ensure everything is working correctly. Instead of using the form opened in Live Server, we will navigate to localhost / your project folder name / your HTML file name. Since we are running this locally, for me, it's localhost / form / index. Let's test it by entering a random first name, username, and password, then clicking Sign Up. We receive a success message indicating the form was submitted successfully. Next, let's verify the data in our database. Navigate to the account table in the YouTube database, and here we can see the submitted details. That's how you connect an HTML form to a MySQL database using PHP. I hope you found this tutorial helpful and that it answered your questions on form handling and database connectivity. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, leave a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more web development tutorials. See you on the next one.